I'm sure many of you will have worked out the missing word to these quotes as failure, and that's going to be the topic of my talk today. In assemblies like this, teachers really like to talk about success, but are much more uncomfortable talking about failure. Maybe we don't really know what to say, and we haven't really thought about it. And that was certainly true of me until I read this brilliant book on the subject. And when I read this book, I had two main thoughts. The first thought was I wish I read it when I was younger, and the second thought was I think it's got a number of important messages that I want to share with you, and that's why I'm giving this assembly today. Now, what you're so often told about is messages of success. So you're given quotes like the one by Henry Ford that you can do anything if you have enthusiasm. So that's the idea that with hard work, with effort, you can achieve anything you want to, sort of regardless of natural talent or luck. Now, it really is amazing what people achieve when they put their minds to it. So, for example, Henry Ford was born the son of a farmer. As a young boy, he's good at fixing watches, goes on to become an engineer, and then sets up the Ford Motor Company, which completely changes the way that cars are made. You've also got examples of sporting success. So, for example, in 2016, Leicester City won the Premier League, where the year before they were almost relegated. In the year that they won, they were basically almost given no chance of winning the cup, but they did. You've also got very personal stories of success. So, for example, Arthur Bourne was a US paratrooper who very badly damaged his knees and back through doing parachute jumps. And he was told by doctors that he'd never walk unaided again, that either he'd need to be in a wheelchair or he'd have to have crutches with braces. And he was like that for 15 years until he decided he was going to take up yoga, which you can see as a series of balancing and stretching exercises. And within less than a year, he'd completely transformed himself in someone who was able to run around and literally balance on his head. So is the message from this that you can achieve anything with effort, with hard work you should be able to achieve absolutely anything you want to? Because I hear that you're often told that. And I think even by looking at these examples, you can see that's going a bit far. So, for example, Henry Ford set up the Ford Motor Company, which was an incredible success. But around the same time, there were nearly 2,000 car companies in America, and only 3 became as large as Ford. I think it's a bit difficult to argue the other ones failed simply because they weren't enthusiastic enough or didn't work hard enough. In a similar way, Leicester City won the Premier League in 2016, but it didn't win the Premier League the following year. And of course, most clubs don't win the Premier League. Most clubs aren't even in the Premier League. Now, Arthur Bourne was a man who was able, through doing yoga, to be out of his wheelchair and running around. He'd hardly walk up to someone on the street and tell them that just with yoga and enough effort, they'd be running around too. And I think believing that you can do absolutely anything with effort can kind of become a bit ridiculous. I remember seeing the beginning of a film where a young man dressed as a superhero leaps off the top of a building. And he was dressed like a superhero, and he clearly thought he was one, but unfortunately for him he wasn't. And I won't say what happened to him, but it didn't end well, although it did end rather quickly. And more recently I've seen a YouTube clip, which I don't think is a fake, of a young man going to great efforts to try and have energy bolts explode at the end of his hands. And he clearly tries very hard, but you might not be surprised to hear that nothing actually happens. So why is it you're told, particularly by teachers, that you can achieve absolutely anything you want to? Well, the first thing I'd say is I think they don't mean literally anything. So, for example, you can't become a superhero. So what they're saying is that you can achieve anything you want to, but of course not anything, which I think is slightly confusing. And I think when adults tell teenagers that they can achieve anything they want to, what they're really trying to say is that you're the ones at the steering wheel of your life. So the decisions you make and the effort you put into things affect where you go and what you do. And that is completely true. Also, I think they want to agree with the statement that you can do anything you want to. Because if they say, well, that's not quite true, that you will think the opposite is true, that you can't do anything you want to, which is the idea that, any goal you have, there's no point working towards it because you won't achieve it. Now, that's also wrong, but believing that is much more damaging, because of course if you believe that, you won't make an effort and you really will get nowhere. So what is the truth? What can you achieve? Well, I suppose there's some things that with reasonable effort are almost guaranteed. So I'd say if you work hard, you should be able to pass your GCSEs, or at least get results you should be proud of. In a similar way, if you care for what you eat and you take exercise, you should be fit and healthy. Also, with hard work and a little bit of luck, you should get a job that you enjoy and you can live off. I'm not saying you'll love every moment of it, or will make you rich, but it'll be okay. But what about things that, let's say, you think are much more ambitious than that? What about, say, becoming the next Prime Minister, or a movie star, or a billionaire businessman, or an Olympic gold medalist? Are you able to achieve things like that? Well, I would say the answer to that question is something you don't often hear, particularly from teachers, and I think the answer to that question is that we don't know. I would say that teachers don't know it, I would say your friends don't know it, I would say your family don't know it, I would say not even you know it. How can any of these people know what you can do in the future? They can't see into the future. So what should you do? Considering there's no absolute guarantees in life, what should you do? The first thing I'd suggest you do is do try. Really do make an effort. Do have goals, do have plans, do have ambitions, do follow them. You'll be amazed what you can achieve with hard work. You'll surprise yourself and you'll surprise other people. But, and this is the thing we don't like to talk about, sometimes, even if you work really hard and you're very good at something, sometimes you will fail. I know that some people think I'm wrong pointing out that sometimes you will fail, and that it's mean, or it's a put down, or it lacks an aspiration, and I really disagree with that, and I disagree with that for a number of reasons. The first reason I disagree with it is when you're given the message of success that you should achieve anything with hard work, the response that many of you have is kind of whatever. You think it's ridiculous. And I think there's a danger with that you dismiss the idea that with hard work you can go a very long way. But I also think not talking about failure is really ultimately unkind and cruel. And that's because telling someone that they should be able to achieve anything with success, with hard work, is going to make them feel great at the time. Well, of course you've just told them they can achieve anything. But what happens when that person works really hard and fails? Well, if they believe the message that success is guaranteed through hard work, they can only really explain that by thinking, well, either they didn't work hard enough or there's something wrong with them. And I don't think either of those things are true. Now, I've been teaching my subject for now 10 years, and I've come across people that have found it very difficult and worked incredibly hard, particularly coming up towards their GCSEs. But sometimes when they get their grades through, they don't really get a grade they want. They get like a level D, some of them, which is more like a level 3, which is of course not what they want. I'm sure what they wanted was an A star. Well, who wouldn't? But to believe those people to believe they didn't work hard enough or there's something wrong with them really is cruel and completely unfair. I think I should also say there's huge problems in this country with teenage mental health, so things like anxiety and depression, eating disorders and self-harm. And the reason for those problems is complicated, but I think being told that you should be able to achieve anything with effort is a pressure you can do without. When I look around this room, I see people that are going to get great grades that they're really happy with. They have jobs that they really enjoy and love, be in fulfilling relationships, and probably go on to have happy children that thrive and do well. Basically have a lot of success in their lives. But I also see people that are going to get grades that they're very disappointed with, and have jobs they don't like, or maybe no job at all, have heartbreak in their personal lives, go on to have children that don't thrive and they're worried about, and rightly so, and have a lot of failure. But the really important thing to understand is there's not two separate groups in this room. There's not like the winners who just have success and the losers that just have failure. Because everyone, and I really do mean everyone, has both success and failure in life. So for example, there's been times where I've got grades that I've been really happy with, but also times I've been very disappointed by my grades. Times I've been content in my personal life and times when I've been miserable. Times when I've loved my job and times when I've loathed it. Times when I think my children are doing well and thriving and times I'm worried about them. Overall, I suppose there's times where I feel my life's going well and I'm a success, but also times when it's not going so well and I feel I'm failing. So is the message from this that everyone fails sometimes? Well, that's true, but I think in response to that, many of you may think, so what? That I really need to read a whole book and give an assembly just to tell you something that many of you already know. But the answer is actually that the whole way we look at success and failure is basically wrong. Because the way we look at it is that, success is good and failure is bad. I mean, it's so obvious you don't even need to say it. And in fact, the more you look at success and failure, the more you understand it, the more you realise that that's actually not true, and that failure is not the opposite of success, it's actually part of it. Now, when I first heard the statement that failure is part of success, I basically thought that sounds like rubbish. So I'm going to explain to you why it's not rubbish. An example I'm going to use is something called the spaghetti challenge. And this is where you're given 20 bits of spaghetti and some string, and you've got to create a structure that holds a marshmallow a metre up in the air. And in this you have different groups competing against each other, and the first people to build the structure are the winners. And you had four groups. You had a group of engineers, you had a group of business people, and you had a group of lawyers. But none of these people won the competition. The people that won the competition were the final group, which was a group of 6-year-olds. Now this seems extraordinary. How can a group of 6-year-olds be adults, particularly when those adults include engineers whose job it is to make structures for a living? And the answer is that the children succeeded through their failure. So while the adults were sitting around discussing how they're going to build the perfect structure, children just got on and started building them. And most of them were dreadful. Most of them fell over straight away. But each time they built a new one, they were learning what worked and what didn't, and maybe eventually they got a little bit lucky, and they were the first people to succeed. And seen in this way, you can understand that it's not so much that you simply try something and then you fail or succeed. It's much more likely that you try something and you possibly fail, then you try again. But out of that process eventually comes success. And many people here will be thinking, well, that's all very good if you're building towers of spaghetti, but of course that doesn't seem to really apply in real life. But I'm going to show you how it does apply in real life. And in doing that, I'm going to show how early failure leads to later success in two quite different ways. One way in which I think you have success from earlier failure is you keep on trying at the same thing and succeed at it, mostly by getting lucky. An example I'm going to use here is Thomas Edison, who invented the modern light bulb. And when he was looking for materials to make the light bulb work, he literally tried 1,000 different materials until he came across the right one. And that's why when he was asked, how does it feel to fail 1,000 times? His response was, I didn't fail 1,000 times, creating the light bulb had 1,000 steps to success. In a similar way, I think you can have success in the same area and you keep on working at it, but not so much by getting lucky, but more by learning from your mistakes. An example I'm going to use here is the Apple Newton handheld computer. And I doubt many of you know about the Newton computer because it wasn't very good, and when it came out not many people bought it. But what the company learnt from making that computer helped it to go on in a few years' time to make the Apple iPhone, which has been immensely successful. You might have success, similarly failure in the same area that you started off in by getting lucky or by learning from mistakes, or probably a combination of the two. Or you might have success, similarly failure when you decide you're going to try something else. And the example I'm going to use here is this young American man who started off working on the railways, but that didn't really work out, and he left those jobs. He then started working as a lawyer, but he got into punch up in court and wasn't allowed to practice law anymore. He then worked in a number of restaurants, some worked well but some didn't, and eventually they shut down. And he was in his 60s, actually without much money, but he decided he was going to do something else. He decided he was going to sell a recipe to restaurants. And when I tell you it was a chicken recipe, and I show you a picture of the man himself, you'll realise that's Colonel Sanders, and in his 60s set up KFC. Now, knowing that failure can lead to success, it shouldn't surprise you too much that successful people fail. So, example, Steve Jobs, the man who helped set up Apple, was at one point pretty much fired from that company. You've got Oprah Winfrey, an American talk show host and businesswoman, one of the first black American billionaires, and often said to be one of the most influential women in America, was when she started her career as a news presenter, was fired being told that she wasn't really up to it. You've got Steven Spielberg, probably the most successful film director of modern times, but as a young man he didn't get into film school. Now, it's all very good saying that the successful people fail and failure leads to success, but there's no getting around the fact that failure feels awful. Now, failure may feel awful, but there's a reason for that. And the reason is, when we first evolved, when we were first running around as cavemen, making a mistake, whether it being eating the wrong plant or letting a saber-toothed tiger creep up on you, was going to be fatal. So the way our brains are structured, the way we naturally think, is we hate failure, because hating failure will keep us avoid doing those things and keep us alive. Now, that was great back then, but you now fast forward a few thousand years, and we've basically got the same brains, we've got the same bodies, but the world around us is completely different. And now, rather failure being something you need to avoid, because it can be lethal, is something you need to be able to deal with every day in order to be able to do difficult things like reading or writing, let alone doing a difficult job. And I'm not saying that understanding failure in this way is going to suddenly make you love it, but I think understanding why you feel so bad when you fail should help you deal with it when you face it. Earlier on in the talk, I said how earlier failure can lead to later success, either by keeping on trying at the same thing and succeeding in it, or trying something else. And the obvious question is, well, which one is it? If I fail at something, should I keep on trying, hoping that it turns round, or should I try something else? And the answer to that question is, well, it really depends. And often these questions are going to be some of the most difficult things you have to answer in life. So let's say you're not in a particularly happy relationship. Do you move on, or do you decide to stay, hoping that it turns round? And the same thing maybe is a job that you're not particularly happy with, or a place you're living that you're not particularly happy with. Do you decide to move somewhere else, or do you stay where you are, hoping that it gets better? And all I'll say here is that sometimes people keep on doing the same thing when they really should change. So, for example, let's say it's Saturday night and you've gone out with a few friends of yours to the cinema, and you're 20 minutes into the film, and basically it's dreadful. You give it another 10 minutes and it's just getting worse. Well, what do you do at this point? Most people stay because they say, well, I've spent my money getting here and I've spent my time coming here. I don't want to waste that. But the fact is that time and money is already wasted. What you should do is leave. In a similar way, you hear people that, they read a book, they're a few chapters in, and they're not enjoying it. But they say, well, I've started it, so I'm going to finish it. But you think, well, unless you need to read that book, you should put it down. There's literally thousands of others to choose from. More worrying, you hear of people that are in unhappy relationships. But when you ask them why they don't leave, they say things like, well, I've already been in this relationship for 5 years. I don't want to waste that time. You often think, well, you've got 50 years ahead of you. So what I'm saying is if you're doing something that's really not working, and you know it's not going to get any better, and there's an alternative to go to, which is better, be willing to make a new start. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about is going to seem slightly odd. It's also something which many of you don't need to know about now, but all of you will need to know about at some point in your life. And that is that a massive failure, a crisis, can be a good thing. Now, I want to emphasise it's not always a good thing, but it can be. So, for example, when you ask people what's the best thing that's ever happened to them, people often give responses you'd expect, like getting married or having children. But also people give responses that seem really quite odd. So people say things like the best thing that's ever happened to them is getting divorced, or the best thing that ever happened to them was getting fired from their job. People even say the best thing that ever happened to them was going to prison, or sometimes even getting cancer. Well, this seems extraordinary. How can people say these are the best things that ever happened to them, when obviously at the time they must have been absolutely awful? And the answer to that is, a crisis is a time when people often look at their lives again and make changes for the better. So, for example, the woman that wrote the book on which most of this talk is based, says there's two things in her life which she's really proud about. One is her job as a writer and journalist, and the other is a relationship with her husband. But those successes only came out of real failures earlier on in those areas. So, for example, she only got a job working as a journalist and writer when she couldn't get a job working in her first choice of banking after leaving university. In a similar way, she only started a relationship with the man that would become her husband when she got dumped by her long-term boyfriend twice. Now, without going into any detail, my personal experience in both my private life and my work life are really very similar, and I know that many of my friends is too. But also the idea of a crisis being a good thing reminds me of a book I read by this actor called Michael J. Fox, who in the 1980s was a huge Hollywood star. And he considered himself a lucky man, not because he was a successful actor who was undoubtedly rich and powerful, but because he contracted a really nasty illness which would eventually kill him. But he said that illness made him look at his life again and make changes for the better. So my point is that at some point in your life something awful will probably happen to you, and at the time it's going to feel dreadful, but you may look back on that thing, be it in 5, 10 or 15 years time, and actually realise it might have been the best thing that ever happened to you. So what have we learned? Well, we've learned that everyone fails, but we've also learned that it's not so much that you simply try something and have success or failure. It's much more that you try something and maybe fail, and maybe try again, but out of that process comes success. And for that reason, failure is not the opposite of success, it's part of it. And that success may come about by trying the same thing and either getting lucky or learning from mistakes, or probably a combination of the two, or deciding you want to try something else. We've learned that successful people fail. We've learned why failure feels so awful. We've learned that if something's really not working, be willing to make a fresh start, and that sometimes a crisis can be a good thing. Thank you very much for listening.